Hey guys, welcome back to the Mark series. My name is Katie and this is Mark chapter 6. Jesus feeds the 5,000 and Jesus walks on water. Before we get to those two passages, I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you what happens prior to that in Mark chapter 6. So the first thing that happens in Mark chapter 6 is Jesus is rejected from Nazareth, his hometown. He goes to Nazareth and he preaches there. He speaks with great wisdom, but his hometown people can't believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that he's the Messiah. They see him as the young boy who they knew, who grew up with his brothers and his sisters, just the normal kid and the one who was a son of a carpenter. And so they see him as the son of the carpenter, Joseph, but they don't see him as the Son of God. So Jesus leaves there, he marvels at their unbelief, and so he moves on from there. And then we have Jesus who sends out his 12 disciples, gives them power to cast out demons, gives them power to heal the sick, and so they go off preaching to people to repent, and they start healing people and casting out demons. And then there's this section in Mark chapter 6 that talks about Herod, and Herod's wondering, is Jesus somehow John the Baptist who's come back to life? And is Jesus Elijah, the great Old Testament prophet who's returned? Because Elijah was the prophet in the Old Testament that never died. He actually went up to heaven. God took him up to heaven in a chariot of fire. And then there's this big passage of John the Baptist and how he was killed. And so all that leads up to Jesus. He feeds the 5,000. And why is that so important? Well, it is the only miracle that is mentioned in all four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John all mention this miracle. And so it's very important for us to zoom in and look at it. And so let's go ahead and get started on Jesus feeding the 5,000. So it's been a long day. The disciples and Jesus are ready for a break, ready to rest. And so Jesus says, let's go off to a deserted place and rest a while. So they all get in the boat and they start going to the other side. The disciples are finally going to get to have some Jesus time with just the 12 disciples and Jesus. No more multitudes. Finally, we get to have a break. But there's a multitude of people that actually see Jesus from land. They see Jesus in the boat and they run as fast as they can to the other side and meet Jesus. So as soon as Jesus gets out of the boat, a multitude of people from all the cities are there waiting for him. Jesus is moved with compassion for these people. He sees them and he looks at them and sees that they are like sheep without a shepherd. And so he teaches them and he heals their sick. And so it has already, been a long day, but late into the evening, Jesus is teaching these people until finally it's getting very late and the disciples say, Jesus, you need to send these people away because we're out in the middle of nowhere in this deserted place here and there's no food here. So you need to send them away so they can get bread in the nearby villages. Jesus says this next statement, testing them, you get them something to eat. Well, what do you want us to do? We don't have any food here. Do you want us to go into the villages and buy bread for these people? Because that's going to be 200 denarii. And a denarii is 1 day's wages. So do you want us to spend 200 days' wages on bread for this multitude of people? Because we're talking about this is a huge crowd, 5,000 men and women and children here that we would have to feed. And Jesus says, well, how many loaves do you have? And so they go and they find a young boy and his lunch consists of 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But what is this among many? How can we feed all these people with 5 loaves and 2 fish? But Jesus tells them to make the people sit down. And so the disciples make the people sit down in groups of 50s and groups of 100s on the green grass. And then he takes the loaves and takes the fish, he blesses it, asks the Lord to bless it, he starts breaking it up, and a miracle happens. As he is breaking it up, it's just a never-ending supply. He's breaking the bread, there's more bread, there's more bread, there's more bread, there's more fish, there's more fish, there's more fish, enough for everybody. And so the disciples go around and they give food to everybody as they're in groups of 50s, going down the line, pass it down, pass it down, pass it down, here's more, pass it down, pass it down, pass it down, and everybody has something to eat. 5,000 people, 5,000 men, plus women, plus children, over 5,000 people eating until they are full. The Bible says they ate until they were filled. And then the disciples go and they pick up remains of bread. Because some people, they ate enough and there was still left over, because that's how awesome our God is. And so they take up 12 baskets of leftovers, enough for each disciple to have a basket of food to remember this amazing miracle that Jesus did. And immediately after that, John's account actually says that the people tried to force Jesus to become their king. They like the idea of Jesus giving them free food all the time, so they want to force him to be king. This is not what Jesus is about. Jesus sends the people away, and he tells the disciples, you go ahead and get into the boat, and he tells them he will meet them at the other side. Jesus goes up onto the mountain to pray. Meanwhile, the disciples go into the boat, and they are starting to row away across the Sea of Galilee. So after Jesus is praying, he notices as it's darker and night has come, and he sees the disciples over in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, and they are straining at rowing because the wind is very fierce. And so Jesus, remember, he doesn't have a boat. The disciples went ahead of them in the boat. Jesus starts walking across the water to get to the other side, and so the disciples see Jesus walking on the water, and they are freaking out. It must be a ghost. And they are troubled and they are afraid because Jesus is walking on the water. Am I seeing things? What's going on here? And Jesus is walking on the water. That must be a ghost. But Jesus walks up to the boat and starts talking with them. Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid, Jesus says to them. And he gets into the boat. And then immediately the wind stops. And it is not harsh anymore. In another gospel account, it tells us that the boat immediately appears to the other side when Jesus gets in the boat. In Matthew 14, it talks about how Peter walks on the water. So go back and read Matthew 14 if you're interested in Peter walking on the water. And so the disciples are amazed at this Jesus because they didn't understand, because their hearts were hardened when he did the miracle with the loaves and the fish. And what can we learn from this passage? Well, we can learn that when we face a situation in our lives where it's like the disciples said, what is this among many? We have 5 loaves and 2 fish, but what is this among many? We have over 5,000 people here. It's impossible to feed them. But the disciples saw Jesus do miracle after miracle after miracle. They should come to Jesus saying, I know this looks like it's small among many people, but I can't wait to see how Jesus is going to make a miracle out of this, because Jesus is the Son of God. He can do the impossible, and I can't wait to see what awesome thing he is going to do. And that's how we can respond. Instead of when there's a problem in our life, there's a situation in our life where we're like, how is this going to happen? How is this going to be for good? What can God do with my life at this point? We can go to God and we can say, Jesus, I can't wait to see what you're going to do. I know things look like a mess right now, but I know you're going to do something awesome with this. And I'm going to give you my life, and I know you're going to do something awesome. And then when we look at Jesus walking on the sea, we see that Jesus has power over nature. I mean, how cool is that? He walks on the water. Even the wind, the waves obey him. We learned in Mark 4 that Jesus calmed the storm, the wind and the waves obey his voice. And we see that he has power over nature. He's walking on the water. I think we can trust this God that can walk on water with our lives. And when things don't make sense, we can trust him. Nobody else can walk on water. Let's trust Jesus. Let's give him our situations and our lives and let him do something awesome with it, like he did with the feeding of the 5,000. And he did something awesome by walking on the water. This has been Mark chapter 6. Jesus feeds the 5,000 and Jesus walks on water.